Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We're still letting some folks in, so we're going to wait a minute or two. So it looks like we cleared the lobby room. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening again. It's great to see so much excitement about this webinar. I'm Greg Kohler with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. I'm very excited to be hosting this webinar with our colleagues at the Prevent Waste Alliance, and we're going to be having a really interesting conversation today about innovative approaches to manure management. We have two great presentations from WRI, but quickly we're going to do a quick overview of CCAC and Prevent, just to give a little bit of background for everyone. And we're also going to have a couple of poll questions coming up, both at the beginning of this session and at the end. So please keep them. We're looking forward to your feedback through those poll questions. So next slide, please. So housekeeping rules. You may have noticed already the session will be recorded, so please keep that in mind. You're automatically granting permission for recording in this webinar. Please turn off your camera just to avoid distraction and mute yourself while not speaking. You can use the chat for your questions as well as the Q&A tab, so we'll be monitoring that, and we will have time after the presentations to have a little bit of Q&A and discussion with the audience. And one final note, no AI chatbots, please. We're, for privacy considerations, avoiding any AI chatbots. So we're going to start with our first poll question. And the first question is, what is your current role in your organization? So we're getting some responses. We'll keep it open just a little longer. All right, great to see so much participation from across various different sectors. We have government, NGOs, intergovernmental organizations, and as well as consultants, private sector, and academia. Great to see a very broad group in the audience. Next poll, please, Marco. So this next poll question is, what methane mitigation measures are you aware of? So just in terms of context setting, manure management, many of you are probably experts in this field. We're just getting a sense of what kinds of solutions are you aware of? What kind of solutions excite you in terms of manure management? So we're getting some really interesting responses already. We'll give a couple more, a little bit more time. Unsurprising to see digesters and composting coming up as kind of key mitigation solutions. We also have another webinar series with the Prevent Waste Alliance that's focusing on anaerobic digesters and opportunities for both waste management and municipal waste management, as well as manure management in agriculture. And today we're really going to be focusing on some of those other approaches that exist. And so whether that's composting, solid liquid separation, um, better spreading, some of these other solutions that are being mentioned here as well, acidification. And it's also interesting to see some of the measurement approaches being highlighted here. And so great to see kind of this very broad overview of these mitigation opportunities. All right, so with that, we can jump right into it. So just to give a brief overview of the CCAC, we are UNEP convened and started in 2012, and we're a global voluntary partnership of committed countries and organizations. We have about over 90 country partners at this point, as well as over 90 NGO and IGO partners. We're dedicated to addressing short-lived climate pollutants and the nexus of climate and health. And so a lot of these, all these short-lived climate pollutants have both an impact on climate change over a short-term period, as well as an impact on air pollution. And you can see in this chart here, one of the key messages to keep in mind around short-lived climate pollutants, they are in a sense the emergency brake that we have on climate global warming, because they last in the atmosphere for a short time. And so we actually have an opportunity through rapid decarbonization alongside mitigation of SLCPs to reduce warming in our lifetimes. So rather than seeing those effects long in the future, we would be able to see those effects in our lifetime. And they're also responsible for half of global temperature rise. So it's really critical that we address not only CO2, but also this other half of global warming. As I mentioned, there are air pollutants harmful to people, ecosystems, and agricultural productivity. Tropospheric ozone, for example, has an impact on crop yields. And methane is a precursor to tropospheric ozone. So a lot of this conversation that we'll have today on manure management will really be around reducing methane emissions from manure. And SLCPs are present in the atmosphere for anywhere between a few days in the case of black carbon, up to around 12 years for methane, and then various other short-lived climate pollutants that have different lifetimes in the atmosphere. And so really looking forward to the conversation, so I'll stop there and pass it to our colleagues at the Prevent Waste Alliance. Happy to introduce Martin Keres, who is leading the Prevent Waste Alliance from GIZ and has been a key partner in a lot of our discussions around waste management and manure management. So pass it to you, Martin.
Thanks so much, Greg, also for having us as co-conveners of this important webinar today. So I'm going to introduce the Prevent Waste Alliance. Prevent was launched in 2019 by our German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. It says think and do tank here on the slide, but it's mainly do tank for everything related to circular economy and waste management. We welcome members from the private sector, academia, research, civil society, and public institutions as well. And our main work is structured according to three material streams: plastic waste, another one is e-waste and batteries, and the third working group is on organic waste. And this organic waste group I am coordinating together with the co-leads of that working group from the German Environment Agency, Anja Schwedje, and the German Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Bert Wiebel. And within this organic waste group, we co-host a series of webinars on biogas, which is on the next slide. And that's how we got into contact with CCSC. So it's really great to join forces here to get more outreach when we talk about biogas from an organic waste perspective, but also on agriculture, obviously. We already had 3 of these webinars editions, and we will have the 4th one in a couple of months in September, most likely, on the technical aspects of biogas. So it's about how to ensure that methane slippage, methane leakage of biogas facilities is as little as possible, and other technical considerations of biogas. So if you're interested, I'm sure it will show up on LinkedIn, either on CCAC as well as Prevent Waste Alliance. And if you're interested in becoming a Prevent Waste Alliance member, you can check out prevent-waste.net. As I said, we welcome any institution which is motivated and works on circular economy. So today, it's great that we also co-convene a webinar which is not only focused on biogas. As you just explained, Greg, I think we had a discussion and you said, well, what about the other opportunities? We don't only have biogas, it would be interesting to also address other exciting solutions and approaches. And that's why we're having this, this resulted in today's webinar, which has a focus on manure management. And so it's not part of the regular series, but it's also very important to discuss manure management and alternative options today. Okay, thanks. So I think that's it from me. I think the focus is more on the action side, practitioner side today. So I think I will give the floor back to Greg. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And in the interest of time, I'll just introduce quickly our presenter today from WRI. So we have Swati Hegde. She is a biochemical engineer by training and manages the agricultural methane program at the World Resources Institute. And she's researching a variety of solutions on methane mitigation across manure management, enteric methane, and upgrading crop residues as improved livestock feed. Before joining WRI, she also worked at the University of Pennsylvania, as well as the Golisano Institute of Sustainability. And she's worked across all kinds of different waste solutions, organic waste, as well as manure management. So really honored to have you here, Swati, and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Greg. And hello, everyone. I am going to be talking about what are some simple solutions, more potentially like immediate solutions to manage manure so that you can get a reduction in methane emissions, particularly with the focus on developing countries. So my talk will cover a little bit of basics around manure management and what really drives methane emissions and why is it really needed to reduce manure methane, especially in developing countries. Some of the existing practices and then some of the other upgrades and solutions, especially for smallholder farms, and then also a little bit of comment on large commercial farms that are increasing in numbers in developing countries. And then we wrap up with key takeaways. Next slide. So manure management in this context, because manure is used in different contexts in different countries. Sometimes it's also referred as fertilizer. But in this context, manure refers to dung, a mix of dung and urine from livestock. It could be cattle, it could be sheep and goat, horses, poultry, any livestock, you name it. And sometimes it's also mixed with bedding materials like straw or sand or anything that's used as bedding for animals. So manure management encompasses managing dung and urine and bedding materials. It involves handling and collection of manure because if the farm is large enough and there are barns where the livestock is housed, there's probably a lot of flushing with water that happens, and that leads to collecting manure in liquid form or slurry form. Or it could be simply collected using scraping, in which case the manure is collected in its dry form. And then there is storage until until it's actually applied, or treatment of manure, maybe using anaerobic digesters or composting. So there are two distinct manure management systems, dry manure management systems. These dominate in a lot of Asian, in Indian subcontinent, even in African, sub-Saharan African countries, perhaps even in Latin America. These are common on smallholder farms, especially where sunlight is available all throughout the year. It's a common practice to sun-dry manure. And these systems have the least methane emissions, which is a good thing. But if not stored properly, and if they're prone to moisture, then they can actually increase nitrous oxide emissions. So dry systems generally have more nitrous oxide, which has a much higher global warming potential compared to methane, versus when manure is stored in its wet form in tanks or lagoons. That's when the methane emissions are very, very high. So generally in dry systems, it's stored as heaps or dung cakes, etc. Next slide. So why manure methane matters? Because I was telling that developing countries mostly manage their manure in dry form, especially small farms. But having said that, smallholder farms, there is a shift towards large farms in developing countries. So shift towards large farms also mean a lot of animals. So mere number of animals itself makes it very important to manage methane. And at the same time, in countries like China and Brazil, the pig production is increasing, and swine production is one of the largest sources after dairy cows. Um, that emits a lot of methane from manure simply because how the manure is stored. So manure methane can make up to 10 to 25% of agricultural methane emissions in these countries. And a shift from smallholder to commercial farms may lead to more wet storage of manure, especially hog farms. So manure management provides a very, very tangible opportunity to reduce methane because compared to like enteric fermentation, which probably most of us are aware of, there are a lot more regulations when it comes to feed interventions, etc. But those technologies for manure management already available. So there are things that can be done immediately. So in that sense, it's a more tangible opportunity to immediately reduce methane. And managing manure for methane reduction can also offer a lot of other co-benefits like fertilizer. It can increase fertilizer value of manure. There are water quality benefits. And potentially, if the technology is feasible, then there could be potential income streams for farmers or businessmen. Next slide. So one of the most common methods that you see, especially in Asia and parts of Africa, is the household manure digesters. They are a very common practice, and there are staggering 45 million digesters in Asia alone, and roughly 35 million of them are in China, over 5 million systems in India. And these have been a very important part of energy access and improved air quality in these regions. But these systems are also getting very old. They're there for decades. And what's happening with that, especially the older system, the picture on the bottom, it's kind of just a floating dome, which has a sort of open access to manure from around. And there is also a stock storage tank, which is kept open all the time. So it's like if there is a small farm with 1 or 2 cows and there is manure or dung, which is generated in dry form. Now, because we have to feed it into the digester, we mix with water or some sort of a liquid to convert it into wet form. And the where manure is mixed, the tank is usually not closed, and then it feeds into the digester. And the biogas is captured for cooking purposes in most cases. So these systems are becoming very leaky, and a lot of these systems are also some recent evidences show that a lot of 30 to 40% of these systems are not used to their full capacity, or just dysfunctional. So with that, if not managed properly, biogas digesters can actually increase methane emissions, particularly because you're converting something manure that is dry into a wet form, and also there are a lot of leakages. So while biogas digesters are an important part of air quality, energy access, as well as methane reduction, they should be managed properly. They should be monitored properly. They should be airtight from all sides. Some of the new systems, the one on top, that's a plastic based system, and it's covered and sealed from all sides. So it's not open, or it does not have access to soil or moisture. So those upgrades are going to be very essential. Next slide. There are other existing practices where digesters don't exist. It could be simple drying. Drying is one of the predominant practices, especially the one shown in picture, the dung cakes. In this case, cow dung is usually mixed with straw or crop residue or some sort of other organic waste and dried under sun. And the ultimate application of it is burnt as cooking fuel. So while there might not be a lot of methane emissions during storage of dung cake, unless it's really there is really moisture seepage, uh, because it's burnt as fuel, that can release a lot of carbon monoxide, methane, and as well as black carbon. Uh, so uh, so in that case, during its application, it does release a lot of methane and black carbon. In some cases, it's just dried, solar dried, and bagged as fertilizer. That's another application of it, but just using manure as fertilizer, it may not be as effective as composting it in terms of its nutrient, like the NPK value. Composting is another practice common in Asia. It's kind of sporadic, but it's probably even from the word cloud, I saw that anaerobic digestion and composting were the most familiar methods. So composting, if done properly, it can nearly eliminate methane because it completely is aerobic process. There is oxygen involved. It completely eliminates anaerobic conditions. It also improves fertilizer value. But poor practice can actually raise nitrous oxide emissions quite significantly. So one very important thing to keep in mind for methane reduction is that most technologies or options that reduce methane, they often increase nitrous oxide emissions. And so any practice should be mindful of this trade-off, basically. There is also garden or farm spraying practices, which probably have the lowest methane emissions if it's sprayed immediately after the manure is produced. But there could be risk of nutrient imbalances, or it could be a labor-intensive process, just like composting. But this is ideal for mixed crop livestock systems if there are enough um, farm acreage to actually spray manure. Next slide. Other existing practices, particularly for large farms, involve anaerobic lagoons, which are earthen ponds mostly. Sometimes they're lined with plastics if they're built properly, where they store manure for a long time. This will increase nitrogen and phosphorus value of manure, but at the same time, because there are anaerobic conditions, this has the most methane emissions of all the systems. There could be tanks or deep pits, especially in case of swine production. If you see the picture of swines there, it's called the slatted floor. So the manure just goes down below. That's where the swines are placed. Um, and there, the pit itself is about 8 feet deep. So they are deep pits where manure is stored for a long time. these have the most methane emissions. So any technology that replaces these systems will have the most methane reduction benefits. Next slide. There could be, like I said, it's really hard for implementing solutions on a smallholder farm, because if there is just one or two cows that produce very little manure, it's just not reasonable to ask farmers to implement some of these advanced technologies. So simple upgrades for smallholder farms, it could involve storage covers, just covering and containing manure more efficiently by using either plastic covers or wood covers, which can reduce methane by up to 20%. So any form of covering manure storage is good. Next slide. It could be concrete floors, plastic liners, and roof covers. There's some capital investment involved, but keeping manure drier is the best way to reduce methane emissions. It will minimize contact with soil, rain, and groundwater. It will also avoid leaching of these nutrients into water, which could otherwise lead to algal growth and eutrophication and such other water quality impacts. So bottom line is less moisture, less methane. Feeding cows better. So in smallholder farms, particularly, manure management should be looked at in a more holistic manner, because it's difficult to implement a solution just for one thing. So instead, if it's seen as a more holistic, like enteric methane, manure methane, increasing feed efficiency, etc., that would be the best approach for smallholder farms in general, and that's where governments can support these farms. So feeding cows better, I was happy to see this option in the word cloud poll. So more digestible feed means less digestible feed in manure, which also means less methane. So just feeding cows better with more digestible feed, more supplement would actually help with reducing methane in manure. Next slide. Clean burning stoves could actually reduce methane, particularly because still a lot of biomass and manure and the cow dung cakes are used as fuel for cooking. These clean burning stoves they also have subsidies in a lot of countries, so they can reduce emissions quite significantly by 30 to 60%. So the smallholder farms could actually make use of these subsidies to use them. And then importantly, I think community manure management practices, because as I said, technologies are hard to implement when there is just one or two cows. There is just no economies of scale, or they are not feasible economically. So community practices can help where you can increase manure volume and therefore perhaps use a more advanced technology. Maybe something like in-vessel composting, which has the least environmental impact compared to any other open composting. Next slide. So there are large farm alternatives as well, which I'll quickly go through. Solid liquid separation, when you just separate manure solids, which are mostly a result of fibers and residue that's in the manure, from liquid, because it reduces moisture content. You can reduce methane by up to 60-65% in this case. And this is really a very good option for large farms. And all of these options, or especially solid liquid separation, it's in a way more effective than digesters, because a lot of digester climate benefits come from offsetting fossil fuel or electricity use. From manure management perspective, digesters probably provide 25 to 35% reduction. So solid separation in a way can technically directly reduce manure management emissions by a lot at a fraction of a cost of digesters at large scale. Aeration is another thing. So as long as there is no oxygen, there is no methane. So aeration technically can eliminate methane. This is sort of like composting, but for liquid systems. Acidification is a new emerging technology that's becoming popular, especially in the developed world. Denmark is the one that's pioneer in this technology, and it's being used on swine farms there. So it just reduces the manure pH so that methane-forming bacteria cannot be active and produce methane. So it's a simple mechanism. But it's on all of these are in a way knowledge-intensive technologies. There are perceived concerns and risks, and the actual economic benefits of the products that are produced using these are not yet quantified. So there is a need to quantify these benefits. Next slide. More innovative approaches are possible. There are circular economy inspired approaches. It could be using manure as a feedstock for producing biochar, and biochar then used as soil amendment. It can also provide a lot of soil benefits. One thing that I particularly like is manure to black soldier fly, because black soldier fly is now increasingly seen as a protein source, especially as livestock feed. So if you can use manure from livestock system and feed it back within the livestock. So we are basically keeping all materials within livestock system. So that could actually offer a good solution if economies of scale exist and the economics work out. But these solutions can often be offer new economic benefits in these countries, especially because more solutions for manure management are picking up. And these could also offer agribusiness opportunities for entrepreneurial enthusiasts. Next slide. So the key takeaways are methane from manure is rising in developing countries with more commercialization and increased swine production. Some of the largest meat companies are also headquartered in some of these countries. So manure management offers an immediate and tangible opportunity for methane reduction. Small farms, one thing to keep in mind is that when the technology is implemented, one needs to make sure there is a plan for nitrous oxide emission management. So the small farms can reduce methane with simple upgrades, which are more immediate, which could be covers, dry floors, better feed, clean cook stalls, and community practices. Commercial farms need advanced solutions, and there are innovations like Black Soldier Fly, which can unlock economic and business value. So quantifying economic benefits, particularly from all these different options, could serve as an entry point for climate smart manure management, because farmers somewhere have to realize what the economic benefits are of all these different options. Next slide and last slide. So there are certain development needs, which I kind of talked about all throughout. So we need targeted solutions that suit local systems and that match production systems and contexts, maybe rural, urban, large, small farms, mixed crop livestock, etc. We definitely need more pilot trials for all innovative technologies. So there has to be some sort of a public-private partnership that increases pilot trials so that there is more trust in these technologies. And there is also need for open data sharing. We simply don't have a lot of farm-level data in different contexts. So that's the biggest bottleneck for adopting some of these technologies. There needs to be policies that actually support these innovation. Denmark's carbon tax policy is a good example for this one, where specific technologies are spelled out within the policy document. There is definitely strong monitoring and verification for biogas digesters needed, just to make sure there is they don't increase emissions. And quantification of economic benefits is going to be very important for adoption. So that concludes my talk. I'm happy to answer any questions now or later after Mindy speaks. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati. Really interesting to hear about some of those trade-offs with nitrous oxide. Really important to keep that in mind. So appreciate that a lot. And also really interesting overview of all of these mitigation scenarios. There's a lot of fruitful discussion as well in the chat. And so with that, I'll pass it to our colleagues from Environmental Defense Fund, Mindy De Paula and Akin Olumorati. Mindy leads the EDF Agriculture Methane Team's community and equity work, and Akin works with a cross-cutting team to drive adoption of solutions with farmers. In their work at EDF, they focus on building and maintaining constructive partnerships with rural communities and farmers. And they collectively have experience working on agriculture and environmental pollution across Peru, Nigeria, and the Mississippi River Basin in the US. Looking forward to your talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Marco, you can go to the next slide. Today, I'll be talking quickly about manure as a major cause of methane emissions, although Swati covered quite a bit, thankfully. And the second piece will be some solution sets really in a high-income country or a more intensive system, solutions that can be implemented to avoid or destroy methane, and considering trade-offs and costs. And then we'll cover a few innovative and effective policies that are needed to help farmers implement the solutions, and finish with some best practices around community co-creation that can address certain barriers to adoption in high-income countries. Next slide. So just to recap what ag methane is when it comes to manure and livestock, as I think we already know why methane is important. Next slide. Methane is formed by the long-term anaerobic storage of liquid manure, which means high nutrient content, high moisture, and low oxygen. 90% of the methane is coming from enteric fermentation, but manure is also a source in uncovered manure storages. Why is manure stored at all? Most of you probably know this, but farmers store manure to ensure protection of water quality, so manure is only applied at correct agronomic times, but that does increase the methane production as discussed. So in essence, in terms of addressing climate impact, we do need to seek alternatives that capture and destroy methane or avoid and reduce methane production in the first place. Next slide. Wanted to include this, as you can see, for intensive systems. Manure really is important in the short and long term. This source is based on the United States, but I think you can see here that if we reduce manure management impacts, the result is great. So we'll go to the next slide. This is not exhaustive of all solution sets, but I'll quickly go over 3 solutions that may be suitable for farms in high-income countries like the United States. The first is improved manure spreading management and application. As you may know, business as usual practice on many farms in high-income countries involves spreading raw or processed manure on fields to fertilize crops. Associated methane emissions are low, but the nutrient losses to the environment and emissions of nitrous oxide and ammonia can be high, and Swati mentioned that as well, especially if nitrogen application rates exceed plant needs at the time of application. So improving these practices can mitigate some of the emissions, which means things like spreading more often, which reduces overall hold times in lagoons and therefore less time in anaerobic conditions. However, water quality can be an issue if not properly managed here, and seasonality matters as well. So for example, depending on where you are, applying right before rain or snow is risky for nutrient runoff. In much of the US, if you apply in the spring, you can reduce methane by up to 50% compared to fall application. And then you'll see here, there's $1 sign to $3 signs. Cost is mostly around equipment, ongoing equipment, and labor. The second solution is Swati mentioned solid liquid separation, and that applies here in high income contexts as well. Basically here you're removing the feedstocks that methanogens are eating, so it can be a little bit more capital intensive, but it can also be the first step for other solution sets like composting, as Swati mentioned, and a few of you mentioned also cap and flare, which I'll talk about next. And the solid organic fibers can also be used as a bedding option, which can help overall farm costs. Again, Swati shared a lot about this, but it does have the potential to reduce methane quite a bit. And the third one I'll talk about today is cap and flare. And cap and flare covers the manure with a gas-tight cover to capture methane and other gases produced during decomposition. And these captured gases are then routed to a flare where they're burned, and they convert that potential methane into less harmful carbon dioxide as well as water vapor. This system reduces GHG emissions, but also can mitigate some odors from the manure storage and allows also for rainwater diversion, which reduces the volume of manure to be managed. Depending on your location, again, covers can get fairly expensive, but they still are quite a bit cheaper than larger projects like anaerobic digesters. Next slide. Next slide. We'll go into a few manure management practices. So given that manure management involves on all components of farm management, and this got cut off, but when we share the slides, you can see the entire table. It involves all components of farm management, from infrastructure to operations to financials. Adopting new manure management practices and solutions is a really big undertaking. And so factors such as size, existing on-farm infrastructure, community infrastructure, geography, all of that impacts what management system is optimal. So this table just goes over a few types of incentives when it comes to the factors such as size and cost. Next slide. So most of our work, and I know this slide is text heavy, so bear with me here, but most of my work has been focused on the US, although we do have a team that works globally. But in this context, we'll talk about some US policies that are helpful for incentives to pay for some of these practices we've discussed. So in the United States, the EQIP program is administered by the USDA and provides financial and technical assistance to folks to implement conservation practices. For manure management, these practices include constructing waste storage facilities, solid liquid separation, composting systems, manure transfer, roof runoff management, as well as decommissioning outdated storage facilities for manure. EQIP was originally created through the Farm Bill, but importantly, as I mentioned, it does offer technical assistance as well at no cost. The second program at the U.S. federal level that I'll talk about is RCPP. It's a voluntary program as well, Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And as it relates to manure management, it mostly helps with reduced nutrient runoff practices. Finally, conservation innovation grants help more innovative solutions, as it sounds, that we may or may not have discussed here today. So that does include manure injection into the field, biochar applications, and other more innovative practices that spurs public-private collaboration. So now I'm going to run through two quick case studies of policies at a state level. This first one is the Alternative Manure Management Program, AMP, in California. It's run through the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and they fund eco-friendly ways to manage manure on California's dairy and livestock farms. So this really supports the implementation of conversion to practices that cut GHG emissions by handling and storing more manure in a drier form, where it doesn't produce as much methane as it breaks down, as discussed. We know that digesters may not be suitable for all farms, and so instead, non-digester manure management practices that AMP funds can be things like we discussed as solid liquid separation, dry scraping or vacuuming, open solar drying or composting, alternative treatment and storage, so housing cows in different compost bedded pack barns, as well as pasture-based management, and they do fund up to $750,000 US per project. The second state that I'll cover is in New York. Next slide. And the goal of the program in New York is to focus on mitigation and adaptation when it comes to agriculture and climate. So that's reducing impact on climate as well as increasing resiliency of farms in New York. And here funding is available at the county level through the soil and water conservation districts. And there are three categories of projects, only one of which is really relevant to the livestock systems, but ag waste storage, cover, and flare for methane reduction. There is some water management and soil health system funding as well. But again, the most relevant to manure management is this ag waste storage, cover, and flare. So it's this major focus on cap and flare. The reason that this has a major focus in New York is because New York bases their emissions calculations on GMP 20, and that's methane is heavily weighted, and it's cap and flare is much less costly than digesters. Some farmers don't have the flexibility of size or live close to a gas pipeline for a digester to even make sense, regardless of cost. And in addition, cap and flare does have some payback for farmers because they don't have as much water to haul or to spread. So essentially, this expands the opportunity for farms of more sizes to participate in capturing their methane. Next slide. I'm just going to end with best practices that we've learned on the ground in our work here in the United States with implications for other countries and other settings. So this is around farmers and communities getting involved in the decision-making process around manure management solutions. This first point of farmers being part of the solution And in some cases, this population group is the same, farmer and communities. Many places in Europe, for example, farmers are not just the source of manure, they're really key partners in implementing the sustainable solutions that benefit ag and the environment. And many farmers are already adopting climate smart practices. So making sure you know in conversations with farmers what is already occurring or what specific regional challenges are before implementing policies and incentive-based policies is really helpful. For example, if you're in an area with lots of indigenous farmers and you only allow a small amount of practices to be incentivized and they're not the ones that farmers in the area are already using, you are maybe leaving behind or leaving out folks who are, already engaging in responsible stewardship of the land and may unintentionally cause tension or harm. The second point is here is robust solutions need widespread support. And transparency really does build trust. So clear communications with farmers and communities around practices, technologies, and outcomes helps reduce opposition and misinformation. And that ultimately makes the practices more robust and more successful long-term. The third point on this slide is more obvious, I think, and I've partially touched, I think, on it, but the solutions that we've talked about today, both Swati and I have already demonstrated positive results in many situations. So they're already technologically proven. They need to continue to be scientifically backed, which really means considering regional variations in climate, soil, and livestock operations. And again, I've harped on this a little bit, but they do need to be financially viable, as even though they may be less expensive than anaerobic digesters, they still need to pencil out for farms of all sizes. Next slide. So this is kind of the gold standard in terms of how we think about responsible community engagement, and that is for farming communities, non-farming communities, rural neighbors, etc. Farmers can often get demonized, but they are part of the solution. And in a similar vein, the solution doesn't work if it's not working for nearby community members. So the work that we've been doing and what we think is a best practice for everyone in this space is really to find an alignment of solutions that work for farmers, that work to protect communities, both their health and the environment, and as well as mitigating methane. In this diagram, that means we're trying to move from the left to the right, knowing that in some cases it may look different, or we might not get fully to the right, or we might take bits and pieces from several of these categories. And an example here so far in our work with farming and non-farming groups in the United States is that farming groups I work with often think neighbors don't want ag at all, or they want to regulate a lot of the farms out of business. And while that may be true in some instances, so far I haven't found that to be the case. When I spoke with a community group around coming up with solutions that worked for them, 9 out of every 10 folks didn't want to implement mandates or regulations, but mostly wanted to just increase incentives like the ones that I've talked about, or policies and education to understand things like nutrient management plans better. And on the flip side, many communities didn't always know what farmers are already required to do on a regular basis around nutrient management planning in more intensive systems. So there's a lot of room for education and dialogue on both sides. Next slide. So this is the final slide. Based on that, my final best practice is really around education and trust building as you set up these policies or incentives around manure management solutions. Trust is really the foundation for collaboration and mutual understanding, which leads to better outcomes. When farmers and community groups see each other as partners, not opponents, in addition to partnering with folks working on climate or working on ag, and all of us here in this webinar, these solutions become more practical and lasting. And sometimes trust needs innovation as well. So in some of our projects, we're using unifying activities like sports or games to really build the trust in each other before having more difficult conversations. And we found this has really shown humanity in others and leads to more robust solutions. Bridging the perception gap, I talked a little bit about in the previous slide. Respecting lived experiences, I've also talked about as well. Farmers and communities do bring generations of knowledge to the table, and honoring that in your policies and practices, especially when you're discussing new technologies, is quite helpful. Shared language, shared purpose. Again, this education piece that really helps all stakeholders, including us on the call, speaking the same language around goals, around emissions reductions, around environmental protections can be really helpful. And then finally, Early and ongoing communication really matters, engaging farmers and communities from the very beginning, not after those decisions are made around your policies or your incentives, but really as you're thinking about them, builds trust and reduces resistance, and again, makes solutions more effective. I do want to just end on celebrating successes. As you go through this, I think you'll find it's complicated and nuanced, and I think we already all know that. But showcasing small successes and wins where you've partnered with farms or partnered with communities that are already working together on manure management solutions can really help inspire and others to innovate and take your lead. So with that, I think we're going to open it up for questions, but thanks.
Thank you, Mindy. Yeah, really interesting to hear about all of the nuance that goes into this from both your presentation and Swati's presentation, and these interesting models for community engagement and how do you bring farmers along as part of the solution. So really interesting to hear those insights. And just before we go into the questions, we'll give you, Swati has been very active in the chat, so thank you for that, Swati. And we're going to put up the last poll question quickly for everyone. So after these presentations, which mitigation measure do you see as the most promising? And so just whether it's one of the solutions that's been presented here or a solution that you've heard of elsewhere, just curious to get your feedback in terms of some of these interesting approaches. And if you've already submitted your response, feel free to already think about some of the questions you might have for our presenters. I've gotten a couple of responses, a lot of emphasis on BSF. I very much agreed. I really appreciated that in your presentation, Swati, and some of the discussion, Piotr, in the chat. A really interesting solution to be investigating and looking into. And we can now open it up to the Q&A. Does anyone from the audience have any questions for our presenters? And you can raise your hand. Yes, Hans Andre.
Yes, hello. I've already put this question into the chat. I understand that the manure of cattle, goats, and the likes is not very suited for black soldier flies. And I wanted to ask this question because the fiber content is actually very high, and black soldier flies don't like to consume that kind of manure.
I can do a quick comment on that. So I am not personally working on black soldier flies right now, but we did explore it during my PhD days to grow black soldier fly on manure. But I think you mentioned it in the chat that it almost pretty much always needs some other source to balance nitrogen. I think we did a growing it on food waste and manure wastewater together. So maybe it needs some sort of an approach that involves other organic waste materials that are available in the region. But yeah, that's as far as I can go in within my knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll add as well, pig manure is a major source of methane emissions as well. So even if it's only applicable or most applicable in those situations, it's already a very significant source of manure methane emissions.
That's a great point, because often a lot of solutions, even solid separation, it's challenging to implement in swine farms because swine manure is like really fine. It's not as coarse to be separated by a separator. So if there are specific solutions for pig manure, that would definitely be something to consider.
And then Nia?
Yeah, thank you, Swati. I have some questions already raised, but I have another question related to the, we usually consider the co-benefit for the small farmer holder, especially the soy production. And as you mentioned, and in Vietnam, we have about like 65 million tons of solid waste combined with a lot of liquid waste, because we have about 29 million head of pig a year. So the big problem with us, we had the first two things. The first one is the most effective way to treat so that we can get the co-benefit of reducing the methane, but also bringing the certain economic benefit for the farmer to do it. Because some farmer, if they use a digester, then the methane produced from the digester exceeds their needs for the home consumption and not be able to use for others. So that is maybe also contributing for increasing the methane. The second is about related to the sites. Sometimes because they are cleaning their pig, so they are diluting the solid waste, become the liquid waste. It's soon be overload to the digester. So that is the problem. If you see any solution for that. The other question related to the black soda flight. So we know that it's high nutrients, but the problem now, because we are marketing those, for instance, you feed it to animals, and some consumer they concerned about the food safety and the clean up the foods producing from feeding the black soldiers from treatment of, and so it may be not be able to apply in the larger scale. Do you think?
Yeah, totally. I agree with all 3 points. And from a smallholder farm perspective, especially, I grew up on one, as a matter of fact. It's really like education, a lot of education around what the co-benefits are. Because it's hard to sell around. We cannot tell a farmer to do this because it's good for climate. That's not the best adoption strategy. So maybe I can comment on your second question, specifically where manure is mixed with water and it's liquid. Acidification could be something that can be tested. Of course, it needs a lot of pilot trials and more education, and those things aside, acidification is something that can actually work at all scales. And another advantage of that is there is really no trade-off, at least in my what I found in my research, no trade-off between ammonia or nitrous oxide. So that really is one technology that can reduce methane, nitrous oxide, and ammonia. So that's why we see a great potential. And there are some pilot trials happening within the US, especially on small farms. Even though US small farms they still probably have 200 to 300 cows. It's much different. But I think if it's constantly mixed with water, I think acidification could work in theory, unless, Mindy, you have any other comments on that.
So we've reached time. Oh, yeah, feel free to jump in. Okay, So we've reached time, and in the interest of all of our audience time, we will unfortunately have to close here. I know there's still more questions in the chat as well as from some of the participants. But thank you again to all of the presenters and to the Prevent Waste Alliance for co-hosting this webinar with us. There's some really interesting ideas that have come up here on solid liquid segregation, separation, as well as BSF and some of the carbon market discussion. I think maybe some things for us to follow up on with future webinars. So we'll be sending out the recording to all of you via email and on the CCAC website. And stay in touch and with both CCAC and the Prevent Waste Alliance to keep updated on future webinars. Thank you everyone for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.